Hello all, and thank you for taking the time to join the second Grand Challenges Presidential Distinguished Forum. I'm Katie Lawson. I'm the Chief Communications Officer here at the University of Maryland, and I will serve as your moderator for today's forum. The Presidential Distinguished Forums are a series of events that feature renowned experts who are working at the forefront of today's most pressing issues. And these issues are all happening right now. From the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change to voter access as we vote early, to the Black Lives Matter movement, current national and world events present unprecedented challenges. But they also provide a meaningful chance to investigate today's issues together and explore new and better paths forward. Today's speaker is Dr. Stephanie Evergreen, the founder of Evergreen Data Academy. Dr. Stephanie Evergreen is an internationally recognized speaker, designer, and researcher. She's best known for bringing a research-based approach to helping people better communicate their work through more effective graphs, slides, and reports. So President Pines will formally introduce Dr. Evergreen in just a moment. Just a few items about our hour together. Please note that we are recording today and we are providing live captioning. So if you would like to turn on captioning, please click on the caption icon at the bottom of your screen. If you need to adjust the font size, you can access the settings by clicking on the arrow next to Start Stop Video icon and choosing Video Settings Accessibility. So today we'll hear from President Pines, followed by a presentation from Dr. Evergreen. After her presentation, we'll begin a Q&A session, and I encourage you to submit your questions all throughout the presentation. I'll be keeping an eye on that. So if you have the questions, please use the Q&A feature. And now it is my pleasure to introduce President Darrell J. Pines.
Good afternoon, University of Maryland community, and to students who are in my Grand Challenges of Our Time class. We are just fascinated and thrilled to have Dr. Stephanie Evergreen with us today. She is a Fulbright scholar and holds a PhD in interdisciplinary research, which included a dissertation on the extent of graphic design used in written research reporting. Dr. Evergreen has trained people worldwide through keynote presentations and workshops for Fortune 500 clients like MasterCard and Facebook, and mission-aligned clients like the United Nations, the Boys and Girls Club, and AARP. Dr. Evergreen is a co-editor and co-author of 2 issues of New Directions for Evaluation on Data Visualization. She writes a popular blog on data presentation at stephanieevergreen.com. Her 2 books on designing high-impact graphs, slideshows, and reports both hit the #1 on Amazon bestseller list weeks before they were even released. Dr. Evergreen believes that people who communicate effectively changes hearts and minds. Please welcome Dr. Stephanie Evergreen.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with you all. I get really excited about this topic because I know that data is powerful and I know that visuals are powerful. And if we can put those 2 things together, we can help save the world. I'm going to show you some examples of that, but I actually want to start with a story about how that did not happen, how we put lives at risk with bad visuals. It's a story about another pandemic that may actually be before the time of some of you who are on the line here, but back in 2014, we had the Ebola crisis. It mainly was focused in West Africa. At some point, a Liberian man flew to the United States with the virus in its incubation stage, so he didn't know. He was in Dallas when the symptoms started to appear. So he went to the hospital in Dallas. That's when the news hit and the US started to just generally freak out. And the director of our Center for Disease Control tried to reassure the public, saying, don't worry, we've got this. This is what we do all the time. We handle outbreaks everywhere. We're trained in exactly how to contain a virus. No big deal. So a couple days later, news hits that, in fact, some of the nurses that were treating this man had contracted the virus. And the US was like, and the director of the CDC came back on the line and said, look, our protocols are great. It's that those nurses didn't follow the training protocols that they had been given, totally threw them under the bus. So I got my hands on the training protocol and I thought you might like to see it. So they all had this checklist, and we know checklists are great. They actually are a way to empower nurses who are typically not feeling like they have the place to say to a doctor, oh, you forgot to take off or put on your PPE in this particular way. They'd be able to whip out this checklist in their pocket and say, this checklist says, you didn't do it right. So we know checklists are good, but the actual training slides themselves, are you excited? I don't think so. Like if you walk into the lecture hall and this is what's waiting on the screen for you, you're gonna wish you'd gotten a taller coffee, you know what I mean? Let's look at some of the internal slides. Yeah, not so much. Learning from bullet points is incredibly challenging to how our brains are set up to consume information. One of my favorite researchers in this area, his name is Richard Mayer, and he studies this whole idea of PowerPoint, how we teach and learn through PowerPoint. One of his studies, he had the typical death by bullet point, like what you see here on my screen. And they tested this audience. They were looking at the long-term memory retention. So they tested the audience 2 days later, gave them a quiz on the contents from the talk. Average correct response, 10%. So in the experimental condition of the study, they replaced the bullets with visuals, with pictures, and they just had the content come from the lecturer. And when they tested the long-term memory of that group 2 days later, their average correct response was 75%. Because our brains are wired to consume information through visuals, not through bullet points. Now, the CDC training slides did have some pictures on some slides, but they weren't even the same pictures that were on the checklist. So they didn't have this like one-to-one correspondence between what they learned in the training and the thing that was hanging out in their pocket later on. So it's not the fault of the nurses. There's no wonder here that they couldn't follow the training protocol. The issue is all in how this information is presented. We're going to get 10% retention. So I want to move to a more current pandemic. There's probably one data visualization, one visual that is sticking in everybody's minds when I talk about the coronavirus pandemic. Flatten the curve, right? It has shown up everywhere, and it's so everywhere, and it's so simple too that like everyone has successfully reconstructed it in their own branded colors and fonts. I'm sure your university has as well. So did the one here where I live. When I saw this in the news with the branding colors of the local university, I knew that this visual had reached this like peak level in data visualization that us specialists only ever dream of. And the thing about it is that it's not even a graph. It's not based in numbers. This is just a concept diagram, but that's part of what made it so easy for people to read. So, I mean, I feel like we needed a more coordinated response. We needed accessible, widespread testing much sooner than we got it. But I have no doubt in my mind that this concept diagram kept some of the spread down and saved some people's lives, because the visual makes the case for us in a way that words alone could never do it. Why is that? Let me tell you about some research. So researchers out of Cornell provide some evidence that the presence of a graph itself is enough to persuade people to change their minds and believe something else. So in this study, it was really simple. They presented the study participants with information about the effectiveness of a fake drug. Some of them got that information with the graph that you see here on my screen. The graph didn't even include any new information that wasn't already in the narrative text itself. It was completely redundant. But the people who saw the data with the graph, 97% of them believed that the drug worked. The people who just saw the text, only 68% of them believed that the drug worked. So the pictures make it into our belief systems in a way that words can't. Let me tell you about another study. So in this study, researchers were surveying 1,000 people each week about coronavirus and mask wearing. Each week, they asked the exact same questions to track the trend. Then, like midway through, half of those survey respondents saw the same questions, but with this infographic mixed in. And that is when they saw all these incredible changes in those survey responses. The people who saw the infographic had increases in their knowledge about the effectiveness of masks in protecting themselves, in protecting other people, and they got the biggest boost from the people who had previously reported being oppositional to mask wearing in the first place. So infographic changed people's beliefs in a context that actually saves some lives. I want to jump to another pressing topic, climate change. Probably the most well-known graph in this area is this famous hockey stick chart, where if you turn your head sideways, you see this like hockey stick kind of pop out, where we have this huge increase in temperature changes in more recent years. The original appeared in Nature in 1988, and I think those of the more scientific among us saw it and loved it because it was like speaking to this urgent need, but it didn't really get popular outside of that small group. Why? It's ugly, that's why. So like Flatten the Curve, a lot of people have tried to put their own like spin and their own branding to give this thing a makeover. Here's the rendition that was put out by The Guardian. And it's better, right? The annotations help. The actual data we're looking at here is deviation from average temperature. So they gave us a title that's a little bit more clear about that. They ditched the confusing secondary axis. It's better, right? But even cooler was when Al Gore put this data in his movie, An Inconvenient Truth. This came out before some of you were probably even born, but it was cool. So he had the data in the graph and he would start on one side of the stage and like walk you through the ups and the downs as he moved from the left to the right. And then when he got to the big uptick, he actually climbed into a cherry picker that rose him up as the line was rising to the top of the screen. You're just watching it going, where is this thing gonna end? It was super powerful. So even more currently on the same topic, Ed Hawkins, researcher Ed Hawkins, took this up and down that we see in the deviations of the temperature, and he turned it into shades of color. So in doing that, he kind of invented this new graph type called an instance chart. Here's what it looks like. So same data that we saw before, it's just stripes of color, where they're color coded by shades, so that the darker the color, the bigger the deviation from the average temperature. So you can see instead of that uptick in a line graph, the shades just get darker and darker red as you move toward the right. It's so beautiful. It's so eye-catching that it has now shown up on meteorologists, on a Tesla, and on the pins of US lawmakers. When we have policymakers wearing data visualization, I think we're getting somewhere, you know? So with this visual, the general idea is that it's so eye-catching and it's so compelling that it makes people want to ask you about it. Like it almost doesn't need a title because you know that the pin wearer or the owner of the Tesla is going to talk to you about how they never have to fill their car with gas anymore, stuff like that. But I think outside of this, sometimes it's the title itself that can be the most compelling part. So we want to be thinking about titling our charts closer to the way that newspapers title their articles. If you think about stuff like what the New York Times puts out there, their headlines are like a full sentence that give you some kind of insight, you know? Job losses soar. It's not just job losses. US virus cases top world, not just US virus cases. It's that insightful title that pairs with the visual that ends up making it meaningful for us. The New York Times is among a group of our major newspapers who have taken to including massive data visualizations on the front page now. It's really cool. In fact, data journalism is like now a thing that you can study where reporters learn to read data and then incorporate it into their articles more, thereby increasing their own data literacy and thereby increasing all of our data literacy as they're putting these graphs in front of our faces. We're seeing more now than we ever have in the past. The sheer quantity of graphs just as a part of our daily lives has increased so much over the last 5 to 10 years. And all of our collective data literacy rises with it. It's pretty cool. The larger picture here is that data is now becoming a thing. Like it's our new source of something, I don't know, inspiration. Some people use it to deceive. Some people use it as a weapon. I mean, it can be used for good. It can be used for evil. 10 years ago, I had hoped, but never actually realistically thought that I would see a president, a journalist, arguing over a graph, but this actually happened recently. Donald Trump and reporter Jonathan Swan were in an interview. They were discussing the US handling of the coronavirus. And in this exchange, Trump is claiming our numbers are low. And he whips out this graph to support his point. And the journalist is squinting at the graph and he's telling Trump, this is not the right metric. Trump's like, don't worry. He gets out even more graphs. Okay, so this entire exchange is cringeworthy for like a number of reasons, but I'm sitting here thinking how just with so much awe and amazement about the fact that data is now such a central role in our conversations. It's so cool, even if our collective data literacy still has some work to do. So I want to reassure you that you don't have to land in a seat across from the president in order to make an impact with your data. You just need to work your world, whatever that world might be. That's what my clients do, and I want to show you an example. So my clients at the Arizona Department of Health are epidemiologists, which means they're incredibly smart people about an incredibly specific topic, public health. What we see from the research is that people who have this like super specialist knowledge about some kind of pinpoint subject matter, they don't struggle with data when it's presented in a table. They're steeped in a culture that teaches and learns through tabular data. It's not a problem for them. But the people who are not specialized experts struggle to make meaning out of a table. You're probably struggling a little bit right now. And that's the thing, part of the mission of a public health department is to convey that specialized knowledge that they have to people who are not as familiar in a way that's gonna cause them to take some action, change some behaviors, and save some lives. So we're talking about stuff that's life or death critical here. So I helped the Arizona Department of Health make a change. Let me just walk you through the table for a quick second, then I'll show you the graph that we made. So the table is looking at trends in uninsured rates between 2009 and 2014. It's broken out by race, ethnicity, and then they're comparing Maricopa County, which holds Phoenix, to the state, to the US. Okay, so do you see some interesting patterns in here? I kind of doubt it. I'd probably need to give you the rest of the hour to dig through and find something. There are interesting patterns in there though. So I help them visualize the same data table in a set of dumbbell dot plots. The blue dots are Maricopa County, the gray dots are the state, and the black dots are the nation. Dumbbell dot plots are a great graph type because they help us see how closely the data points cluster together or how much they spread apart. So we see when we look at these all together who had the highest uninsured rates across all racial groups. We see whose data points are fairly similar at county, state, and nation. We see whose data points jumped significantly from year to year. This huge change we see in Asian from 2009 to 2010 actually makes me feel like something was wrong about data collection that year, you know? Those things are not gonna jump out to you as quickly or as easily in that table. I love dumbbell dot plots. They help us tell interesting stories in ways that other graph types just can't. I'm gonna give you one more example. So AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, was reporting median income. They do this all the time. In this particular data set, they had pulled together average earnings for professions that are predominantly employing women. So when we look at the gender gap here in professions that typically employ women as a dumbbell dot plot, it really helps us see the story here that men are earning more on average than women, even though women are the ones that are typically filling these roles. The dumbbell dot plot showcases this in a way that other chart types can't. It's really good at talking about gap or disparity. The data that you produce in your own corner of the world, wherever it might be, deserves the same kind of visual justice. I want to talk you through another example. So Citigroup recently came out with a report, huge report, about how racial discrimination against Black people has cost the US economy 16 trillion with the T dollars just in the last 20 years. They pointed to four main contributors to this: lending, discrimination in lending to small business owners, access to higher ed, pay gaps, and housing. Those are the four specific contributors that they were referring to. Here's how Citigroup visualized that data in their report. They paid some graphic designer to create an infographic executive summary. This is what they came up with. It's technically highly visual, right? But it lacks the kind of necessary impact that would convey the urgency of this issue. This was such an unhelpful graphic that when NPR picked up the story, they didn't include a single graphic from the Citigroup report. And instead, they just conveyed those high-level costs in narrative bullet points. Bullet points are where data go to die. Once I got past my frustration that we shouldn't have to make an economic argument to combat discrimination, I got angry. And it's this anger that has returned to me over and over since I woke up to the power of data visualization. I used to work at a university. I was a researcher full time. And the thing that was keeping me up at night was that I would be producing great studies that had really interesting findings, but my results always seemed like they were falling flat. And I couldn't understand at the time why. My data was dying. And it's because I was reporting it just like NPR. Now I see this as a lost opportunity to communicate about a very important topic with the kind of urgency and boldness that it really deserves. So I took those Citigroup data points and I created this. It's called a tree map. It's a very simple graph that has a lot of visual impact. It lays out those exact same 4 data points just in a way that's going to grab a bit more eyeballs. So the morning that this report was released, I was on Twitter ranting as I do about these 3 visuals, Citigroup's, NPR's, and my remake. One of my followers replied with this tweet. On the plus side, I'm glad to see that my friend and colleague Fanaba Otto's research on racial wealth disparities is cited here. Yeah, it is super cool when our research can get picked up and contribute to something like this. It's like every researcher's end game. But here is what Citigroup did to Otto's work. These graphs are typical, definitely not the worst things that I've ever seen, but they leave so much to be desired. The disconnected legends require like mental gymnastics to jump from the title to the chart down to the legend below. In the graph on the left, the data about Black people, which is arguably the central metric in this entire report, is literally hidden behind other data that is not even part of the main argument at this stage. If I was Addo, I would be furious that my work was so poorly represented. So I got curious. I hiked down to my public library to dig up Addo's research and see how she graphed it herself. Turns out she didn't. Like most academics, she simply wrote about it in paragraph form, not a visual to be found. Now, hear me here, okay? I'm not faulting Addo. We are all a part of this larger institution that has not been adequately preparing us for how to make our data useful. I mean, here's how I was reporting my data before I knew better, okay? Don't do this. And this is how we can make a bigger impact in our small corner of the world. My position is that we all have this ethical responsibility to do our data visual justice, to give it more life in our worlds, no matter how big or how small they might be. You might not be tackling COVID or climate change. You might think your data is only this small topic that's going to just appear on a few pages in a 4,000-page, 4-volume compendium that's in the library. So why waste any precious space with a graph? You might not think that it's worth the time to present your data effectively, that it's not going to make a difference. But that's exactly the kind of thinking that's going to ensure that it never does make a difference. No matter the size of your stage, your data can help us meet the most pressing challenges of our time with a clear message that will persuade other people and change their actions and help save the world. May we make it so.
Thank you, Dr. Evergreen. That was fantastic and extremely insightful. I would like to sort of start the question and answering off, kind of returning to this concept of data is about storytelling. And I really loved your quote, and see if I got it right. Bulleted points is where data dies. If I said that, I know I paraphrased it. I know it's not exactly right, but that is absolutely true. So in your work, data visualization is about storytelling. How can we, going forward and trying to explain the story, the research that we're doing and the impact that we're trying to have, how can we also be more objective while also being inclusive? How can we do that with data visualization?
That's a really big question to unpack. First of all, I think that the notion that we can be objective is a little bit misleading. Like everything is subjective. Everybody's coming with some background, with some some kind of baggage, some assumptions, something that's going to influence the lens with which they view their data. Everybody has it. So the sooner we recognize that everybody is storytelling, everybody is editing a little bit, the more that we're going to recognize we have the power to do so as well. And of course, there comes a responsibility with that to be truthful and honest with how we're representing our work, but there is no such thing as objectivity. We're going to have to, we'll always have to make some kind of claim, statement, point. And the thing is, if we don't, other people will do it for us. So it is our responsibility to make sure that we're telling it in a way that we think is most honest. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that did. But how do we now be more inclusive and make sure that audiences who feel marginalized feel like they're represented in these visualization graphs?
Yeah, so well, I think one of the ways we do it is to make sure that all the data, all the research that's being done, I mean, I feel like people who are in marginalized populations tend to be over-researched anyway, but so I think that including them in our process of constructing meaning, I mean, that's the first step before we get to the visualization. It's what do we see? What are our insights when we look at this data? Being inclusive means that we're including folks who are the recipients of our work in the way that we construct our questions, our survey, our data questions in the first place. Our research questions should be informed by them as well. So it is data done with, not data done to or data done on. And then when they co-construct the insights with us, then we're going to end up producing stuff that better matches their story in the first place. In my particular world, I don't do specific research anymore. I specifically just look at data visualization. So I make sure that the work I talk about, the examples that I talk about, are focused on social justice in the first place. I mean, if you're going to have to show an example, might as well make it a good one, right?
Right. I just want to go back to the point where the example that you gave about the Citigroup, I think it was $13 trillion. I mean, I read that in an article, but the visualization, you're so right, didn't really reflect the enormous impact of that. And so it got lost in the news, unfortunately, because of that. It's really unfortunate.
Agreed. And I think that, you know, it was probably well intended. I think a lot of people do what Citigroup does, which is they have a lot of academics who write the bulk of the report, and then they hire a graphic designer to help them create a slick infographic 2-pager that they think will get more traction. And this isn't to say anything bad about graphic designers, but traditional graphic design curriculum in higher ed does not include content related to graphs. So graphic designers produce beautiful things. They just they struggle with what to do with the data, with the graphs. And so many times it ends up just being a fancy bullet point, really. When I think if we could get a little bit more in graphic design, marrying graphic design and data together, then we would end up with stuff that knocks our socks off, and I wouldn't have to be on Twitter complaining about it.
Well, thank you. I'm going to see if Katie has found some questions from our audience. So I'll turn it over to Katie Lawson.
Yes, thank you. So many interesting questions from the chat. And then the first one that I'd like to turn to, I hope I'm saying, Judy Kyle has submitted, how can we as individuals increase our data literacy without necessarily attending a class for it? So what are some of the things we can do on the other side? So not visualization, but making sure that we're reading this correctly. Dr. Evergreen.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the nice thing is we have some free examples these days. I shouldn't say free. Journalism is not free. We should pay for our journalists to do their work, but we have fairly inexpensive examples all around us. So if you look at like Washington Post, New York Times, all of our big newspapers now are using data visualization in a really big way. The New York Times even has an entire division that like a group of 12 or something that their job is just to produce great data visualization. So these things are going to be out there. They're in front of our faces. And in a journalism case, they're going to be walking us through the data in the chart. So I would suggest to learn some basic data literacy, like how to read charts in the first place. Pick up your local newspaper. Pick up maybe my local one is still producing some default charts in Excel. So I guess you shouldn't pick up your local. Be careful. You might want to go for one of the bigger ones, but just read the story. They're going to walk you right through how to read that chart. And the more you do that, the more data literate you're going to become.
Thank you. Kurt Dahl asks us, once you've distilled your data story down to your main point or points, what's your process in deciding which data viz would be most appropriate, effective to tell the story?
Sure, good question. So I think so there are some other considerations. You've got your insight, you've got the audience that you need to make this insight to, because the way that you talk at an academic conference to other researchers who are in your exact field is going to be really different than the way that you would talk if you were putting this into the local newspaper, talking to the general public, right? So even the way you word your insight would change depending on who you're saying it to. So you've got to think through who your audience is going to be. That's a point of consideration. You're also going to want to think through the basic nature of your data. Are you talking about change over time? Are you showing trends? If so, there are a handful of graph types that would be most appropriate for that. Is the nature of your data more like parts of a whole? Well, if so, the stuff for change over time isn't going to be appropriate for parts of a whole. So you've got to kind of have some sense of the basic nature of your data and what kind of chart types can help you tell those stories. I think once you've got that and your insight in your audience, you're in pretty good shape.
Great.
Dr. Evergreen.
Because they're really pouring in, and then I'll turn it back to President Pines. Oh, you ready to go, President?
Yeah, I was going to ask questions, don't mind. That
Go
got me
ahead.
excited about something. So you talked in your talk about sort of making invisible patterns visible through data visualization. Can you explain that? And then can you put it in the context of our grand challenges, COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, and how that can be done in context?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, when we are experiencing these pressing challenges on a day-to-day basis, while also just like trying to maintain our own sanity, there's only so much of it we're able to process. And there's only so much of it we're able to process because it happens a couple days apart, you know, like the next time another Black person is shot, is murdered by the police, it's going to be yet one more data point. And so to have to think all the way back to the first one and to try to draw the pattern in your head of what's been going on when they're just delivered in these bites spread out over a lot of time, it's very challenging. So when we can use data visualization to capture that information, then we can see it in one place and start to use it to take some action. I know, for example, several people who are using their local COVID data and collecting it every day and tracking it, because I don't know about you, but here our county health department will announce the new numbers every single day, but they don't track it over time. So people have been taking their own initiative to just like every day, just spend 5 minutes at their computer entering the new number and tracking it over time so that they can make decisions about whether to send their kid back to school, whether it was safe to go to the grocery store, whether it was safe to hold a party. So we're not seeing that stuff delivered in the news. The news is doing their job. They're just spitting out one piece at a time. They're not pulling it all together for us. So I think that, you know, taking those otherwise invisible patterns and pulling them together ourselves is how we end up creating the kind of action we need to take, changing our own behaviors, making the right decisions.
Thank you.
Okay, back to the Q&A. Alex Bryan Tack asks, what's the best data presentation you've ever seen?
What's the best one I've ever seen? Wow, that's such a great question. I actually want to say Flatten the Curve, because it's not even like that impressive from a data viz point of view, but it's just so perfect in its simplicity that everybody was talking about it. Everybody was using it. My mom was like, Flatten the Curve. Really, Mom? Okay. Like when that's happening, I think that tells us that it's working. And so for me, effective data visualization is always about use. It's not about the glitz. It's not about whether it looks so great you'd frame it and put it as a piece of art on your wall. That stuff is nice. That stuff has a role in the world. But if it doesn't compel people to take some action, it's not really that impressive to me. So I'm going to vote Flatten the Curve. That could change next year, but.
Okay, good. Well, hopefully it'll just keep getting better and better. So this question is from Rithik Bansal. Hi, Stephanie. I really appreciate your perspective on data and emphasis of visualization on using that data to have impact. Do you feel this points toward a possible intersection of data science with more creative arts to fulfill that very purpose and fill the gap that it exists between researchers, primarily academics, and using creative means to express that research to a general audience?
Yes. So this is definitely the way of the future, right? I got interviewed by a freshman in high school today who wanted to research me for a career study he had to do. And he was like, what classes should I be taking in college if I want to do your job when I grow up? And I told him essentially this, like, you need to take classes in statistics. You need to be very good at data science. You actually need to be a bit interdisciplinary. You need some art, some good graphic design skills will go very, very far. When we see people who make graphs without the data, without the graphic design, it shows. When we see graphic designers who try to work with data that don't have a data science background, it shows. And but we also need like some English, right? We need to be able to tell the story in a compelling way. So your English background is going to come in here. Sociology and psychology are going to come in here. I mean, it's interdisciplinary. So I always say like the best data visualizers, data wizards are the ones who have a little bit of everything. So I don't see that offered as a course. Like I don't see a degree in a data viz unicorn, but that's the stuff that people are actually hiring for these days. Maybe you need to get a little bit of programming in there too, but like you'll see job descriptions for data viz specialists that require a little bit of all of that. So I think that it's this marriage of all the best worlds. And the most effective workshops that I ever hold are when we have all of those people in the same room at the same time, talking the same language, getting on the same page, then they can go forth and be great teams. These days I see job descriptions that don't want a team, they want one person who can do it all.
Great, back to you, President Pines.
So, today's sort of consumer is inundated with data constantly. Personal data on your Fitbits, other data, COVID data that you just mentioned. How do we use data visualization to kind of break through this onslaught of data information, how to digest it every day, how to make it visual such that people actually pay attention to it if it's so important to them and how they carry out their daily lives? How do we do that?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So, I mean, and this is the thing, right? Like maybe it was probably 10 years ago that I think people realized we needed to make data-driven decisions. And so instead of making decisions from like the CEO's gut instinct or something, we started to collect data. And so we ended up amassing gigantic mountains of data that nobody knew how to deal with. It was just, we started drowning in data. And this is where data visualization, just the act of it, comes into play. Because if you think about how our brains consume information, the trickiest part we have to deal with is our working memory. Working memory is what we use to process information. Working memory is really weak. It can't process very much. The research I've seen on this says that people can only process 3 to 5 chunks of information in their working memory at one time. And if our audiences are in a busy or stressful environment when they're trying to do this working memory processing, they can't even deal with 3 things at once. It's more like they can only process 1 or 2 things at a time. And I'll tell you what, I think everybody is in a busy or stressful environment these days, everybody. So to ask people to set aside all of the other things that are swimming around in their brain and just look at our table, it's a lot to require, especially when we give them tables like I showed you from the Arizona Department of Health. That's a lot of like little tiny disparate bits of information that require a humongous amount of working memory processing power to pull together to see patterns and to see stories. But as soon as we visualize it, we are kind of like pre-digesting the information for our audience so that when they see it, they can pick it up quicker and they can get on to the decision making that they have to do with it as a result. So I think the more that we move away from presenting data in tables and move toward presenting it in graphs, it's automatically going to be that much easier for people to read it. But then how do we get it in front of people's eyeballs? I would say, like, let's not overwhelm folks. Like, you see these infographics these days. I know I keep like kind of ripping on this and I shouldn't, but it's just like too much crammed into one page. It's everything is super large font, bright color, and it's like easier for people to just turn away because it's overwhelming. So I think if we consider the constraints of people's working memory and the fact that they can probably only process like 1 or 2 bits of information at once and start chunking our own storytelling to cooperate with that, we're going to have better success at getting people to actually focus with all the other distractions that are out there.
Yeah. Can I just ask a real quick question follow-up, which is, you all remember the Johns Hopkins data on the evolution of the coronavirus cases around the world. What was your opinion on how that was portrayed in a data visualization perspective?
Well, I mean, I don't want to say bad things about anybody, but it's just, it requires a lot of data literacy to
Yes.
read it. If you already know a lot about it, you would look at it and go, this is an amazing example of a beautiful data dashboard. But if you don't feel like you're that well equipped and you're not that data literate, you really need somebody to hold your hand and walk you through it. So I think it was great for the right crowd.
Got it. Thank you.
So you mentioned constraints of the working memory, which I found very interesting. I even had to write it down. That shows how long my memory is. But the follow-up question is, Harvey Rishikoff says, have you tested which ways are more effective to display data? Cognitively, are there some methods that are tried and true for some types of data?
So yes and no. There's a ton of research. This is, I mean, there's more to be done. So if you need a dissertation topic or if you're looking for a thesis, go forth. There's so much to do here. But we do have a lot of research already conducted around perception studies and mental processing of different chart types. So in general, and this is extremely general, we see things like length, meaning bar charts, column charts, is easier for people to process than say area, like a bubble chart. It's much harder for us to accurately compare sizes of bubbles than it is to compare two bars in a bar chart. So we do see some of that research, but I also feel like that research has primarily been conducted in mainstream North American university settings. And there's a lot out there beyond that little culture where I wonder if those same things apply. People are actively trying to do replication studies to test that right now, and we should welcome that.
Thank you. So this is a very active Q&A, and I have seen a number on sort of people feeling very constrained by templates. So I'll ask this question from Ramzi Kareem. Do you have any suggestions for innovating and pushing boundaries within our visualization where there may be a lot of inertia within our field for using existing types of visualizations?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So there's such a big question. My favorite way to get people to change is to do a little makeover. I would use your own data before you use their data, but just take something that you did recently that they all saw, make it over into something that you think would be more effective, where there's no risk involved because it's already been presented, and be like, hey, look at this before and after. I think this is so much more compelling. Can I go run this by some people that are gonna, I don't know, be our clients or whatever the audience might be, and see what they think, get a little bit of feedback. I think makeovers tend to really open people's eyes. Also, and this is what did it for me, get a book on this topic, I would recommend mine, and stick it like in the break room. And people will just flip through it while they're filling up their coffee or whatever, and they'll see it on their own without you even having to say so. In my work as a consultant, I've seen this so many times that oftentimes the people inside the organization, inside the university department, have been begging for change for years, and it takes the outsider with the PhD to come in and say, you should make this change. And all the people inside were like, we've been saying this, thank you so much. But it takes that outsider sometimes to say so. And so in lieu of bringing me in, a book that you just make available for people can help with that. I'll also say, though, that you might not be in a place where it's going to be that welcome, you know? I see some cultures that are just so steeped in the old way of doing things, and they think that way is perfectly fine, and that's going to be it. I like to bring research to those folks. My books are full of the research that says your way is not necessarily the best way for everybody, but even that sometimes isn't going to convince people. So my recommendation there is to take baby steps, right? So maybe your boss isn't ready for an innovative new chart, but maybe you can just make your title an insight. So it says, job losses soar instead of job losses, right? If you can make that tiny little baby step, and then 3 months down the road, change the default colors in the chart. And then 3 months down the road, do one more tiny little thing. And then maybe eventually you could try a new chart type. But if you can get away with some of the more incremental baby steps, it's more like you're going to be making an evolution instead of an overnight revolution. But either way, you're going to get there.
Really appreciate those baby steps because folks have been asking for a lot of tips, and I feel like we found some in that answer. President Pines, over to you.
So another question that has come up is, what are some of the concerning implications of people of color and women being historically underrepresented in this field of data visualization?
I love that question so much. I think that's a very, very important one. I think that the field itself is partially to blame because, like, for me, for example, my trajectory to get here was a ping pong. Like, it was all over the place before I finally landed in this position. Now we have pipelines that we can use to get people into the right place, and the same issues that we see with the pipeline in every other field is still present in data visualization. But I think the risk we see in data viz is that it isn't talking about diversity and inclusion in the way that other fields are, especially in 2020, but even before this. Data viz, I feel like, since it's such a new field, it tries to act like it doesn't have these problems when it totally, totally does. And that's the danger, is that we don't even acknowledge it, right? So for example, later this month, I'm actually giving a very tiny part of the talk. It's on Indigenous data visualization with 3 Indigenous people from the United States. They're going to be talking about how their particular tribes have used data visualization historically and how they're using it today. And my whole role there is just to say the data viz field isn't talking about this stuff. They like to, we see this is happening right now. There's a digital museum exhibit at Stanford that has been curated by a data viz scholar, a white man, who says in his statement, in his curator's statement, that data viz started in the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th century. There's another well-known data viz elder, another white man, who is coming out with a book on the history and origins of data visualization, where he also says it started with the Enlightenment. And when we see people with big names in our field who are making statements like that, it erases so much. And I think it makes people who might be interested feel like they're not going to be welcome there. Like, it's just like every other field, right? So, so I, for one, am going to have been making social justice a main theme of the work that I do, including holding talks like this and talks on Indigenous data visualization to just get the idea out there more that this is not a white people thing. The white people didn't come up with this or invent this, and there's a lot more room to grow. I welcome other suggestions, though. We certainly need it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alexandra Jones asks, there's a lot of data out there that people can quickly and easily visualize and draw the wrong conclusions, intentionally or not, and then spread it on social media. How can we combat the proliferation of bad or misleading viz?
Yeah, what a good question. I mean, whether it's good or bad, I think we should be looking at the source. Where did this data come from? Just because it's eye candy, we shouldn't retweet it. And I think that's a very hard habit for a lot of us to break. We think something's cute, or we already see that it got like 20,000 retweets. And so we're like, oh, jam that retweet button. But I think we have to learn to pause and ask, what is the source behind this data? Where did this come from? What is this particular person's point of view? If we think about how data journalism is a thing now, if you saw a newspaper article that was super slanted, you wouldn't go, oh, this is the truth. You'd go, whoa, this newspaper leans pretty far in one direction or the other. We need to think the same thing about charts, even though our instinct is to just trust charts more by nature. I told you about some of that research already. I think we have to have that same skepticism that we would bring to anything else. So ask about the source, ask about how recent that data is, and ask what they're leaving out.
Thank you. I want to allow some time for you to ask a question or two of our president. But I can't get over how many questions are in the chat that are just so curious about your opinions on things. And Nicholas Bentley really wants to know, what is your favorite chart type?
Oh, well, I'm going to go with the dumbbell dot that I showed you earlier. I have many favorites. My favorites have changed over time, but I'm going to go with that dumbbell dot plot because it is so great at telling stories about gap or disparity. And I think that is a big story a lot of us are telling these days. And it's super simple to make. The ones I showed you, I made in Excel. I mean, you can make them in any software that you have. You just need to know how. You need to know what buttons to push. The button pushing is the easy part once you know what you're doing. But that's why I love it. It's super simple to make, and the story that you get from it is so powerful.
These questions, data is very personal to folks. Adam Russell writes it this way: have you ever met data? Have you ever met data that were too complex or dynamic that could not be visualized effectively?
I feel like I have to say no to that. But here's a friend of mine recently gave me this phrase that she said, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. And that really sticks with me. I think a lot about, it's not that we couldn't do it, it's just, is it worth it? Like, is this data of such a important nature of some kind of pressing issue that it's worth us putting in the effort to visualize it? But I like to say as an answer, yes, anything can be visualized, nothing's that complex.
Wonderful. So we'll still get to a few more audience questions, I believe, but I know that you wanted to be able to ask our president some questions. This is a presidential distinguished forum. So Dr. Evergreen, what questions do you have?
Yeah, Dr. Pines, I've got tons of questions for you. So I do a lot of workshops. I travel all over the globe teaching people how to think about data and how to make great data visualizations. And a couple times a year, I will get someone who is more of your generation, who is a bit curmudgeonly about it. And I think it actually connects back potentially to the question we got about culture change, where they're just like resistant. It doesn't matter how much research I show them or the makeovers of their own data that I might show them. They're still just like, no, I think the ugly pie chart is better. And I've always struggled to know how to persuade those folks. And so I'm curious what you think is behind the resistance and what you think could persuade those people to come with us.
Yeah, I think everyone has just a resistance to change, first of all. They've been doing things a certain way for many years, and it's worked for them. So when you introduce them to a new data visualization sort of protocol, they're like, well, the old charts worked fine, and people couldn't interpret them. So I think part of this is just getting people comfortable with representing data in a different way. And I'll give you an example of just, moving the inertia of faculty. When we were in the spring, if you would have asked me that we would have converted 100% of our faculty to be in a virtual learning modality, I would have paid you $1 million because that wasn't going to happen. But the pandemic and the virus made it happen, right? So it can happen. So you can change people, you can move them to a minimum level of technology. So I think if data visualization had happened at the same time, we could have probably brought a lot more people with us. But I think even in these times now, because that just happened and technology is so prevalent, I think we need to do training of our faculty broadly and offer them these new tools so that they can use it in their research, in their education. And I think they're always willing to learn, and it just takes time. So, but we have to be very methodical and show them various examples where it can enhance the work that they're doing.
Sure. Okay. So examples and patience.
Yes, examples and patience.
And I think what you said about like recognizing the cost of not doing it, it can maybe be a helpful persuasion. Follow-up question for you. So my talk has addressed coronavirus, it's addressed climate change, it's addressed discrimination in gender and in race. What else do you think, I mean, those are the pressing challenges, those are the grand challenges I see from where I am at this place and age. What am I missing? And do you think there are generational differences in what we see as our grand challenges?
I think if you would have asked me that question in 2019, And our students would have said climate change. They would have said water, clean water, things that the world is facing globally. But today in 2020, like no one was talking about a pandemic as a grand challenge in the last, really they were not. And then it happens. And then because of the pandemic, here's a new grand challenge that this generation is very cognizant of, and it affects them on a daily basis because of the modality that we're in. And I would argue it's a mental health grand challenge. And the angst, the stress, the depression that is affecting them because of the pandemic, but the fact that they're in these virtual environments that minimizes social contact from a human to human in-person perspective. So that's an evolving grand challenge that's happening right now. And I believe the other one, which is generational, is what is happening with social justice broadly and specifically. And I think they believe that my generation didn't do a good enough job to advance the state of civility and equality and equity in the United States, and that the Black Lives Matter movement is a call to action to address or redress some historical wrongs and to make it a more equal and fair and just for its criminal justice system, but broadly structural system in the United States. And I think those two things, the social and justice and this new mental health grand challenge, are the ones that this generation would speak very specifically to.
If I can just pipe in with one comment on that, we didn't talk at all about qualitative data visualization in here, and if I can just bring that up as it relates to BLM, there is an amazing artist. His name is Adrian Brandon. He's on Twitter, and he does beautiful data visualization related to the Black people who have been murdered by police officers, where he sketches out their portrait and then he colors it in. He spends the number of minutes as they were years old when they were murdered. So George Floyd was 46. He spends 46 minutes coloring in George Floyd's portrait. And when you look at his portfolio as a whole, it's incredibly impactful.
Wow. I mean, I'm glad you brought that example up, because people don't think about how art is a way of visualization, the current grand challenge. So thank you for doing that.
So I do want to end on one final question. We're almost to the top of the hour. If you've heard our president speak, you've heard within our community, you hear him talk about excellence in everything we do and inclusion. So I want to end on an inclusive question from Michelle Appel in she's in our research and planning office. Can you talk about accessibility and data visualization?
Sure, yes. That is a field that is certainly growing. So accessibility meaning like making sure that our data can be accessed by anybody with any disability. And I think some of the more common ways that we tackle that are to handle color blindness, to make sure that we're not using red and green color combinations in our work, because those aren't very easily distinguished by people who have the main form of color blindness. Another thing we can do is use alt text behind our charts so that we are communicating the data that is in the chart to someone who is using a screen reader for accessing our information. But there is so much that is going on with it now, stuff that's far outside of the scope of work that I do, but people are starting to experiment with things like data sonification, like making it audible in really interesting ways for people to access it who aren't sighted. So I would say to keep an eye on this area. My blog has some of the more traditional ways that you would tackle accessibility in your charts, but the field is growing in this area very quickly.
So thank you so much. I really want to thank our participants that we received dozens and dozens and dozens of interesting questions. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to ask everyone to please mark your calendars for the next Presidential Distinguished Forum. That will be on November 18th at 4 p.m. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, President Pines. Thank you, Dr. Evergreen, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Dr. Evergreen.
Thank you for having me.